This isn't the song that I...
What?
I don't even know this song. But it's too late. I already pressed record. And it's 21 Pilots. And that's enough. It's cool enough.
It is cool enough.
I don't even know what this song's about.
It's about a car radio.
Connecting that to the passage will be impossible. This is what I was trying to play. Nope, not that one. Hold on. This one. Now we can start the podcast.
Welcome to the podcast.
It sounds much cooler than that last song.
With gravity.
Yeah.
It's
All
much
right.
more relevant. Maybe.
Yeah, sort of. We discussed whether or not this song actually has meaning for the passage, but I don't know if it does. But either way, welcome to Second Look. Glad you're with us. We're going to try to knock out the message that we covered this past Sunday over the next 15 minutes or so. With me, as is quite often the case, is Hunter.
Woo-woo.
And thank you, Hunter, for being here and for being so dressed up for today's podcast.
I'm so casual. It's kind of like a day all of us want to spend in bed.
It does have that feeling.
If you can't be in bed, just take the bed with you.
Well, I got a question. I know this is sort of skipping, but we're jumping right in. The question is, did you wash your hands before you ate breakfast this morning?
So, I don't eat breakfast.
What?
Traditionally.
Okay.
I might sometimes. I do intermittent fasting.
Breakfast ceremonially? Because
sometimes I do, depending
according
on
to the
food.
Pharisees, you must wash your hands ceremonially before you eat. And according to Jesus, no, you don't.
Well, does it count if I...
The gospel frees us from washing our hands.
Oh. So I shouldn't have washed my hands when I just left the bathroom just now?
No, you should always wash your hands.
But it doesn't get me righteous points.
Well, it does for me.
Oh, okay.
And probably all of your neighbors. Love your neighbor.
Righteous points with my wife.
Luther said that Jesus doesn't require you to wash your hands, but your neighbor does.
That is true, yes.
That's a quote from Martin Luther. Maybe.
Yeah,
all right.
Paraphrase.
Listen. We're in Matthew chapter 15, and that is how the story kicks off there. The Pharisees come to Jesus and ask him about breaking the tradition. Which, to kind of back up and refresh your memory, I kicked off the conversation yesterday with sort of an awareness that came out of a book I'm reading. The elders are all reading. Hunter's reading it too. Hunter's on his way for eldership eventually. I think that's the first time we've mentioned that.
What?
Secretly, only second lookers know. Second lookers. That's a term now.
Second lookers?
Yeah. We got to get focused. All right.
How many minutes?
Shaped by the Gospel is a great book by Tim Keller, and in it was just a great set of conversation where he says we're always distorting the Gospel somehow. So even if we sort of find ourselves as the kind of people that we say man, we really understand grace and that's the core idea of the Gospel, well, more than likely we can fall into a trap of abusing grace.
Yeah.
Just as much as someone who might approach Scripture and even the Gospel and say, man, obedience is what it's all about. You can fall into a trap of sort of making that too much of an idea. Your obedience doesn't secure you, and your sort of aggressive freedoms don't necessarily, that's not necessarily the way to go either.
Yeah.
And so since we're always making a mistake, one way or the other, in some form or fashion with the gospel, it would be good for us to be mindful of that and to practice sort of awareness of God's expectations in a clear way. And watching Jesus navigate through this scenarios, it kind of brings it up. So the first thing that happens is the Pharisees are asking the wrong questions, right? And really, I think you can see that. I mean, previous chapter, Jesus is crushing it and really just doing amazing things, and then they show up and they're like, why don't you wash your hands? Which is sort of a non-essential issue. And then Jesus shifts gears and goes right into attacking how they're elevating traditions. So now this is where you jump in, Hunter. How have you seen the church elevate tradition to this level of biblical, it's clearly just a tradition, but the church behaves like it's biblical.
Oh man, it's almost like where do you begin? The catalog is massive, and I think like for me, growing up in a very very conservative, almost fundamental situation, there was so much of this spookiness about some things that come in either through your mouth or through your ears or through your eyes, and like those are the things that like can corrupt you, and so they're elevated like. Those things are kind of elevated as like things you can't do, things you won't like be able to do as a Christian. So like even what we just listened to, like 21 Pilots.
Yeah.
You know, the music you listen to.
Oh my gosh, I haven't thought about that.
Yeah, the standards
You're
you
right.
have, like even in terms of
Or
like,
the way that you're dressed right now.
no joke.
How
That's not a
could
joke.
you honor Jesus wearing flip-flops?
That is true. It's a great. Hey, Jesus wore flip-flops.
Oh, don't give me that excuse.
There was a Babylon Bee article about like the archaeologists discovered Jesus' suit and tie that he preached in.
Oh,
Yeah.
perfect.
It's fantastic. But that's the kind of idea, like these traditions of there are things that are defiling of a person, and if you participate in them, you know, you're breaking the law. The law becomes greater even than the heart.
Yeah. Well, that is absolutely true. And before that is we can create expectations or like sort of implement standards and elevate them to this level of like, you know, this is
Right.
obedience to God to wear a suit on
Right.
Sunday, or to never wear flip-flops,
Right.
or women, or the music you listen to has to fit this ambiguous standard that we've selected as.
Yeah.
This is safe and right. And it's absolutely possible for us to fall into that trap, just like the Pharisees are in. But I would say on the flip side of that, it's also possible for us to not have a close enough scrutiny or just sort of like filter in which we ask questions like, is my music actually doing something negative that is sort of like unhelpful and corrupting my heart and
Right.
mind and drawing me into thoughts that just a side note, a little freebie lesson here. All music celebrates something. Okay? So
That's
like
deep.
that's the nature of music. All music is celebrating something. Happy birthday to you. God bless America. Whitney Houston's I Will Always Love You. Like everything you got is celebrating something. That's the
Really
nature of
profound.
music. So the question is, what is your music celebrating?
Yeah.
And is that a healthy thing for you to sort of like perpetually champion those kind of ideas in your life? It's worth examining. So like on the one hand, we can be too legalistic and say thou shalt not, a little bit too strict. On the other hand, we could be too free and not pay attention to sort of like the impact that certain things can have.
Yeah. I think the biggest issue that probably these Pharisees, and I know like we in our own hearts as naturally born legalists on either side of the coin, legalists to our own self-righteousness or legalists to our own pleasure, one of the things that we confuse often is this idea of like root versus fruit.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's one thing to be like, hey, like let's think about our musical choices and what it's pumping into our heads and even our own lifestyle and how it's affecting us and how it affects our home, how it affects our car ride, how it affects our mood, all of these things, or even my thoughts towards God casually or this world. And so that's all fruit. Like that's all like the final product of what your heart is doing, what your heart is producing. But it's not like root in terms of how you're justified, how God thinks about you. It's not shaping any of those characteristics. And so I think like the Pharisees going in and saying like, you must wash your hands, trying to impress that like this is about the root of your salvation. You know what I mean? Like this is the bottom line.
Well,
Did you wash your hands?
I don't know. Well, maybe they would, but they're definitely grasping at the idea of like following all the rules to the T, and that's gonna secure something for them. And Jesus quotes Isaiah with the verse 8 and 9 in Matthew 15 here. It says, "These people honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men."
Yeah.
And what he's getting at is sort of this practice, and he actually goes into a good example of sort of like how messed up we've gotten, where there's this tradition in the Jewish community called Corbin. How have you heard that pronounced? Is Corbin?
Corban?
Corbin?
Whatever.
See, Kurt Cobain
Kurt
is a
Cobain.
musician that you maybe shouldn't listen
Back
to.
to
I don't
music.
know. I don't know. Jesus is against Kurt Cobain. I don't know. Corban. And it's this practice where, like, as long as you make some commitment to God, you've got cash on hand, but you've made a commitment to give it to God. And then your parents show up and they're in financial trouble. You can just not help them financially because, I've already committed that to God. So I would have given it to you, but, too late. So, like, there's a disturbing thing going on where it's like, you've created this idea called Corbin or Corban or whatever, and you've elevated that above one of the 10 Commandments, which is to honor your father and mother. And, like, you're completely distorting your game here because you're taking some ideas of something that at one point in time seemed like a good idea, and then you're distorting it and making it more important than the main idea. Which, this gets Jesus into the idea of, like, what really, and it's where you were getting at, like, what defiles us. It's not the things we do on the outside that are defiling. It's what is coming out of us.
Right.
There's almost this idea that, like, the defilement is already there.
Yes, right.
It's in the heart, and something has to be purified from the inside out, not just purified from the outside in.
Yeah.
And that is a consistent misconception for not just Pharisees, but I think practicing legalists today.
Yeah.
I think in some cases, I even experienced growing up an expectation where it was like, it was almost communicated to me this way: I don't care about your heart, I just want your actions to line up.
Right.
And that there was like, if you line up your actions, your heart will follow.
Right.
And I never found that to be. First of all, it didn't quite resonate as, like, sensible. It was like, that doesn't seem right. Shouldn't my heart be changed first? I mean, like, I understood, if I'm disrespectful or whatever, like, I get how I need to stop being disrespectful. But at the same time, like, something's going on in my heart that needs to be transformed and impacted.
Exactly.
Which is what the gospel is after, and what Jesus is laying the groundwork for, and really kind of like pointing out the difference between the Pharisaical, which is the sort of like the legalistic path. Through rule keeping you'll be made righteous, and introducing this idea that, like, no, righteousness is going to come from me and impact you from the inside out.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Which is why you can wear the clothes you're wearing today, and no one's going to judge you.
Wait,
I'm not.
No one's.
I'm not
judge me?
judging you. I mean, look how well I'm dressed today.
I mean, I could
versus
judge
the
you.
way you're dressed, and you make your own conclusion.
I'm not going to highlight this great difference between our dress standards.
I'm not going to put it out there on a permanent record.
I'll let you figure it
that
out.
you dressed. I don't know, pathetically today.
Not even trying.
What are you wearing?
I'm literally wearing like athletic pants.
Yeah.
And a very, like, light, because the weather hasn't figured out what it's doing today.
Little hoodie,
like, little
hoodie
hoodie.
action, and
so-
flip-flops.
And flip-flops, which is almost a staple for me. So you should assume the flip-flops.
The good
Everything
news
else
is I honestly don't care.
And that is
It doesn't
really
bother me one bit.
good news.
Yeah, but I also know this, and I don't care because, like, I know this would be your heart, and I think this is sort of like what grace and sort of like law keeping, a balance would be. I would imagine that if you knew you were going to meet some people today that were going through any kind of, like, hard time, you'd run home, which is remarkably close by,
man.
and you'd
Quite the
you'd put
sacrifice.
something else on that would sort of like speak to appropriateness. And I think that to me, that's what there is freedom to kind of like be super casual because you know your schedule, but also there's an aware. In fact, I will tell you this: I got dressed a little bit nicer today, simply because I knew I had 3
Second
meetings.
podcast with Hunter.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to get dressed up for the podcast.
That's right.
Come on. All right. Well, we've wasted your time, and we've gotten the coverage, I think, of this passage. Did you have anything else? You still had the Bible open. I thought maybe you had.
No, I just
You're just being
the more,
looking the part.
Yeah, the
holding your
more the
Bible.
words of the Bible shine on your face, the more
Yeah.
holy you get. So I was going for that. No, it's a great
Smart.
passage,
Yeah,
and it's
that's good.
really applicable.
That's good. Okay. All right. Well, take care, guys. Thanks for listening, and hope this has been helpful to kind of recap the ideas of what Jesus is after and what we can encourage in our walk together in community. Bye.
See ya.